Hey there, listeners. Well, I had a great interview with a guy called Brault, and he is the founder of an organization called Legacy of Significance. Now, Brian was also the global chairman of entrepreneurs organization called EO. And if you know that organization, it's huge. And being the global chairman, he had a lot to offer in our actual discussion. We talked about servant leadership, but we also talked about leading with influence and collaboration. Now, the title of the episode is What the World Needs Now is Leading with Authentic Servant Leadership. And Brian shared some fantastic insights from his background. So now it's time for you to get into the episode. So enjoy.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutsas.
Hey there, listeners. Welcome to another wonderful episode of the Leadership is Changing podcast. Great to have you with us. I've got a great guest with me today. His name is Brian Brault. Brian, a massive welcome to you.
Oh, Dennis, really excited to be here. I love what you do and looking forward to just a great chat.
Yeah, excellent. And so, first of all, because the listeners like to hear this, whereabouts in the world are you today?
Today, I happen to be in a village right outside of Buffalo, New York. So in the northeast, cold part of the U.S.
Wow. In a village area. Yeah, cool. That's great. And when I said that and you said today, do you normally travel a lot, or what's the story there?
Oh, yeah, gosh. So I just got done with a 2-week tour where I was in Atlanta 3 different times for a day each. Some of it was to visit family. My son and his family live there. I was in Mexico for 3 days. I was in Pakistan for 2 days.
Wow.
And South Carolina, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and then ended up in New York City for a half a day, and then took a train up and met my wife in Woodstock from the real Woodstock Music Festival from almost 60 years ago. We met in Woodstock and had a Valentine's Day weekend and got back and babysat my youngest granddaughter. And now I'm home having fun.
Good on you. And I understand that you've built some Inc. 500 companies, including one of them, which has grew to about 300 plus employees and 12 million in revenue. But you did that through building relationships rather than just a sales team. So we might talk a little bit about that later on.
Sure.
But what I'd love to know from you and the listeners would like to know is tell us more about you and your background.
Sure. So right now I'm 61 years old as of about a month ago. And I grew up in this part of the world. I grew up in Rochester, New York. And Dennis, as I've gotten older, I realized that my parents were very much servant leaders. My dad was an executive at Kodak. He won a Grammy Award for work that he did in the mid 70s. He won a Grammy in 2019 for work he did then. Very successful executive at Kodak, then went on to work at Cornell University. So he was a really, really good leader, but more important than that, he was a leader of good. He was very involved in many different aspects of our church and being involved in some non-for-profit boards. And so I grew up in a very servant leadership-oriented household, and that kind of defined who I became as a leader as I got older. I started my first business, real business, during my senior year in undergraduate school at the University of Buffalo. And that business eventually grew into the business you just referenced. That's the business that had over 300 employees and was doing about 12 million in revenue. I sold that business off in 2 different stages. But before I sold that, I started a second business, which was more of a global business. We were mostly in North America, but also in Latin America, the Caribbean, and had some additional locations in other parts of the world. And then sold that business in 2017 and started a third business called Legacy of Significance. It's more of a purpose-driven business that is really designed to help develop leaders across all dimensions of their life. So in their work life, but also in their relationships, in their family, in their marriages, and then also in the community. That's kind of where I am today.
And Entrepreneurs Organization, EO, as people know it as well, you were part of that and became the global chairman, is that right?
That's right. So I've been a member of EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization, for almost 24 years now. And about 14 years ago, started to get involved in leadership. So I was asked to be one of the chairs of the Entrepreneurial Masters program, which is housed at an MIT retreat campus. And I've been doing that since 2007. I've been facilitating it's a 3-year program of entrepreneurs. And also, I've been a forum trainer, but then I started to get asked to be involved in some leadership. So I was involved in as the Global Forum Committee Chair, the Global Learning Committee Chair, and then asked to be on the global board. And I didn't really want to, quite honestly. I never really saw myself as a very good leader, to be honest, Dennis. I didn't really understand why I kept getting tapped on the shoulder and until a later point in time. And I'll talk about that a little later, maybe if we get there. But it was really I got selected to be on the global board of directors and then was really strongly encouraged to put myself in consideration to be chair of the board, and started out reluctantly agreeing to do that. And then I got more excited to do it as it came about. And then I was indeed selected to be chair of the organization. And it was really a wonderful journey.
Brilliant. Now, you've talked about being in some leadership roles and so forth, but how did you actually get into leadership in the first place?
Wow, that's an interesting story. So back in 2002, I had applied to be accepted into what is now this Entrepreneurial Masters program. At the time, it was called Birthing of Giants. I applied to get in and didn't get in. So I applied again the next year and was accepted. And I graduated from that program. It's a 3-year program. I graduated in 2005. The very first year I was in that program, there was a fellow student who had studied Russian history in college. And the Entrepreneurs Organization had a regional event coming up in Moscow, Russia. Now, an American of my generation, never in my life would I ever have thought that I would end up being in Moscow, Russia for a conference. But off to Russia I went. And that was in 2003. And quite honestly, it's a little embarrassing, but it's very typical as an American. I had never been really outside the country. I mean, I live 10 minutes from Canada, so I don't really feel like that counts the same. But the first time I ever really left the country was in 2003, and Moscow, Russia was the first place I went to, and fell in love with the thought of traveling and seeing the world. I called my wife the second day and said, whatever we need to do to travel the world, we just don't really understand what it's like, and there's so much to learn. So we committed to start traveling. And this is a long answer to your question. But what happened is we started going to regional events and global events that the Entrepreneurs Organization ran, and we started to see the world. But in doing so, we started to meet some of the member leaders of the organization at these events. And so I got to know them. But more importantly, I've always made it a point to connect with the professional staff and thank them for all that they did and offer any help and just being someone to listen to if they needed to talk. And so I developed a relationship with the professional staff side. So all of a sudden, when opportunities for leadership started to emerge, there was these connections with the professional staff and relationships with some of the global leaders made me a little bit more front of mind, I believe. And so I started to get asked to step into leadership. That's kind of where that started from that perspective. I mean, I've always owned my own business. So I was a leader in my businesses, but when you own a business, your leadership is more with positional authority. I mean, you have a title, you own the business, but you're automatically a leader by default in a sense. But in the Entrepreneurs Organization, you're forced to learn a new way to lead, because when you're leading other strong leaders, you don't have positional authority. Plus, it doesn't really work. You really need to learn how to lead with relational authority, which is more about leading with influence or leading with collaboration. And it was just really a powerful journey for me.
Excellent. And if there was anything that if you could have your time again doing all of that, was there one thing that was a massive insight or learning for you as a leader?
I think one of the dynamics along that journey was probably what I learned the most was that I didn't really see myself as a strong leader. I didn't really understand why I kept getting tapped on the shoulder to move forward. And so what I did was I always just focused on this is the role I'm in. This is the year I'm serving in this role. I'm just going to be the best I can at this role. And then I'm just going to move on out of leadership and just become a normal leader, a normal member again. And so I never really looked beyond that year. And I don't know that I would go back and change anything, Dennis. But what I learned from that was that that's probably the exact reason I was getting tapped on the shoulder. I had no other ulterior motive. I wasn't trying to elevate into anything beyond what I had committed to do that year. And so I was just trying to be the best I could in that role. And I wasn't political. I wasn't getting caught up in the drama of things. And I think people saw that. I didn't know that's how I was showing up until later when I was asked to be involved in leadership at the highest level. People specifically pointed that out.
I think it's a great point you bring up there that there's two things here. One is that you focus on what you're wanting to do and do really well at it. And and cut the noise out. And then number two is that how you show up matters. And it really does matter. Some really good points you just shared there. Brian, I've got another question for you, and that is, over your years and your experience and probably looking at different other leaders, is there a favorite leader that you may have? They may be alive or from history. Is there a favorite leader you have, and why?
It's probably my dad. Probably my dad, only because he's been my entire life. He's been a significant role model in my life. There's a couple stories that I can recall when I was a young kid that, yeah, my dad was half French, half Italian. So there's a lot of emotion in there. And he grew up with a strict father. He was a strict father with us as well. He probably told me 500 times growing up, this is right, this is wrong. But there was a couple times that I remember very specifically where he shared stories with me using vulnerability, where he basically said, hey, listen, I want to talk to you about this because it's important you understand how you showed up in this situation. And I had said I was going to do something and then didn't do it a couple times. And he said, your word is everything. So he shared a story with me about a time when he was out of integrity, when he was very close to getting his PhD in graduate school, and he was out of integrity with a professor. And the professor, it's interesting because I don't remember any of the 500 times my dad told me this is right and this is wrong, really. But I remember that story, and that story was over 40 years ago, about 43 years ago. And I remember it like it was yesterday. And I actually wrote a chapter in a book once, and I recited that story. And when my dad read it, he called me up. He said, that's incredible because that situation happened over 60 years ago, but you remember it. And he told me like 40 years ago, he said, that's exactly how it happened to a T. And it was just really profound. But my dad, growing up, my dad gave a lot of his time to charity, to helping marginalized people better their position in life. When we would have dinner, we would always say a prayer before dinner. And when it was his turn to say a prayer, he would always end it with, and help us be mindful of those less fortunate than we are. And there was a story when he took all the grandchildren, so my kids, to New York City between Christmas and New Year's, a very cold time of year, that my son at 5 years old remembers vividly that my dad took his long winter coat off and gave it to a woman who was homeless, who didn't have a coat. And so it's really through some of those stories where I realized that my dad and just how he showed up subtly throughout his entire life really influenced how I viewed how we as human beings need to show up and how we need to kind of think of leadership.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. Yeah. And it goes back to what you said earlier on as well about the servant leadership, about your dad and your parents, which is brilliant. So thanks for sharing that. Leadership is changing. That's the name of the show. When I say that title or that statement, actually, what does it mean for Brian?
Dennis, probably the first thing that excited me the most about the name of your show is because I agree 100% with that. And so when I knew that I was going to become chair of the board of the Entrepreneurs Organization, sought out a mentor. And then the very first meeting, I said, I have to be totally candid. I don't really understand how I've gotten here. I don't really see myself as a strong leader. Well, what he encouraged me to do is read a book called Discover Your True North by a guy named Bill George. Bill George was the CEO of Medtronics. when he first wrote the book. Now he's a Harvard Business School professor teaching leadership. But in the first chapter of that book, Dennis, Bill George talks about that the era of Jack Welch and GE of 25, 30 years ago, when the smartest person in the room would evolve into leadership, has evolved. And it's really shifted towards, you still need to be intelligent, but it's really more about emotional intelligence. It's about having a higher EQ. It's about genuinely caring and being invested in the people that you're leading and being good at building teams. And I was 52 years old when I read that book the first time. And finally, I said, well, okay, if this is what people see in me, then maybe I'm a little bit better leader than I thought, because that felt very natural to me. Those traits felt very natural to me.
And do you feel that leaders today really, A, get it, and B, if they do something with it well around the emotional intelligence side of things?
Well, I think there's a number of things. I think the way the world is looking to be led is shifting as well a little bit. I mean, there's different generations that are popping up, and I think what they're looking for in leaders is a little different. I think that there was a time a long time ago many years ago, where people were looking for leaders to be decisive and have a plan and have all the answers and move forward with authority. And I think people are finding is that we want our leaders to be confident, but with that confidence comes the courage to be a little vulnerable, or lead with vulnerability. And that is, we want our leaders to be human, not superhuman. We want leaders that can say, hey, listen, you know what? I made a mistake here and I need to fix that. Or you know what? I don't like the way I spoke to you yesterday and I apologize for that. Or, you know what? I don't have all the answers for the best path forward, but I'm committed to figuring this out and I would like your help. It's that kind of leadership I think is shifting. And I think what people are finding is the know-it-alls, the smartest person in the room, are not being embraced by their peers quite the same way. It's really around leading with influence and leading with collaboration is what is really the strongest attribute that people are migrating towards, those types of leaders.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to have all the answers nowadays, right? You don't have to be everything to everybody or everyone. The important thing here would be for you to engage people, engage them well. Because I think a lot of people get hung up on that word vulnerability and what do I mean? And I say to people, it doesn't mean that you're getting a box of tissues out and you're crying all the time. That's not what we're talking about. It's about you being a human and being real, and that you're not hiding behind the mask of a title. That's the way I look at it as well. Yeah.
Yeah, you just said it so much better than I've explained it. So I love that. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to steal that description because I thought it was spot on. It's not. And, being a servant-minded leader, being an authentic leader, leading with compassion or empathy does not mean being a weak leader or not accepting results. In fact, quite opposite. Yeah, I think that leaders who have those traits actually, especially when they're decisive leaders, they actually get better results. Because when people want to feel heard, they want to feel valued, and they want to feel like they're able to contribute to the success of an organization. And so leaders who feel like they have all the answers, even if they ask for input, if the general feeling is, well, they're asking me for input, but they already know what they want to do, then they're not received the same well. They're not admired the same way. When you have a leader that says, hey, Dennis, I could really use your input here because I think between the two of us, or if you're part of a group, between all of us, we're going to come up with the best answer here. And people feel like that's very genuine. All of a sudden, people feel heard. They feel like they're able to contribute to what the organization is doing. And I have a belief that leaders need to make sure that the people they're leading can answer these three questions. Where are we going? What do we need to do to get there? And what is my role? And where are we going is that clearly articulated vision, that everyone is aligned of exactly, very specifically, what success looks like. And then as a larger team, there's a discussion and there's some strategizing around what is the strategic plan we need to execute on in order to achieve that vision. And then the third part is, what is my role? So everyone from the founder, the leader of the organization, to the person who just started yesterday, maybe on the front line, everyone understands exactly what their role is on executing on that strategy to reach the vision. Then
Yeah.
my belief is the leader, once everyone can answer those questions, circles down to the bottom and serves the people they lead so that they can be successful in executing on that plan. And what that means is it could be budget, it could be holding them accountable, it could be providing support, it could be being there to have a conversation or to talk to or to listen to. It could be going and getting their lunch or running an errand so that they can stay focused on meeting a deadline. But it's our role to make sure that our team is successful and they have the resources to be successful in their role. And that's an important part, I think.
And I think also, Brian, in addition to what you just said there, which I love, is the fact that maybe it's just they should get out of the way because they've set the vision and so forth and strategy. Now get out of the way and let the team execute, let the team get on with it, while also being there to support, as you're saying. Very important. Hey, Brian, the other thing I was going to say is that you just talked about that you just more or less been in various countries and different states within the US and other countries like Pakistan and so forth. The question I've got for you is that life seems to be getting faster. Business seems to be getting faster, whether it's being driven by technology, data, and so forth. What does a leader need to do to ensure their success in their fast-paced, changing world all the time?
Great question. And I can tell you what comes to my heart at this moment, comes to my mind. And I really believe it's around staying connected with the people you're leading, staying connected with what's going on in the world. So be well read, be informed of what's going on, encourage the same in your people so that at least you're informed with what's changing. But then again, with being the kind of leader that says, hey, we as a team need to stay focused on staying relevant and staying current and focus on what's really most important. And so that's really a significant part, I think, whether it's in the past, currently, or even in the future, is leaders of teams, leaders of organizations need to make sure that everyone is kind of keeping their eye on the target and what's really important. And there's things like, certainly the evolution of AI right now is scary for many people because the initial thought is, am I going to lose my job? Is my job going to be outsourced to AI? And so really understanding change management that comes about when the landscape of business or the way the world is functioning is happening, really being able to lead change management and make people feel comfortable, but not too comfortable. Let me see if I can phrase that a little differently. It's really a matter of saying, hey, change is coming at us. The entire world is being faced with business changing the way the landscape of business is done. We need to band together as a team, and we need to figure out the best way to move forward. We want to be comfortable with each other, and we don't want to move forward with fear, but we want to move forward with respect for what's coming at us and being proactive and being on the forefront of change rather than being reactive.
And being in the forefront of change is really important because being reactive is not a good position to be in. Because we've seen how many organizations that haven't changed, haven't been ahead of things, and then have been left behind. There's quite a lot of organizations that we can think about. Even today, there are businesses that are going out of business because they haven't changed with the times. Very important to do it, yeah. You and I have been talking about leadership and from that lens, but if I was to change lens now and we think about it from an employee's perspective, are you hearing or seeing from employees whether their expectations of leaders, have they changed at all?
Yeah, I think it has, at least with some of the younger generations, because I think what they want to know is they want to know that their leaders are decisive and confident and able to lead to help get results. At the same time, they want to understand the humanity of the person that's leading. They want to know who you are, what you're about, and they want you to lead with vulnerability. And again, what we talked about, that doesn't mean you're bringing in a box of tissues and walking around and crying every day. It's more a matter of saying, hey, we will deliver success. We will move forward in a really constructive way. I don't necessarily have all the answers, but I will make sure that I lead in a way that gets the answers from our team and figures out a path forward.
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
It does, and it's spot on. I think you've articulated it really well, because I think it's showing people that it's not just them. They don't have to have all the answers, but it's about how we work together to make things happening. Now, if we were to get your crystal ball out now and think about the future here, Brian, where do you see leadership being in 5 years?
I think what we're finding is that technology is evolving really fast. And I touched on it a few minutes ago, where I think leadership in the future, 5 years out, let's say, is really going to be about what I referred to in terms of having the leader make sure that the people can answer the questions: where are we going? What do we need to do to get there? And what is my role? Because that's going to happen, and that's going to feel like it's changing and morphing and much more quickly than it has in the past. And so really taking all that and being able to successfully navigate change management is going to be really powerful, because the world is going to be changing. And we still have some baby boomers, we have some Gen Xers that are still going to be in the workforce significantly in another 5 years. Yet we've got newer generations that are coming up. And so being able to help align the people you lead around that clearly articulated vision and the strategy to get there, and everyone understands their role, at the same time embracing a very proactive approach to technology and the evolution of the way business is done, and manage that change, is going to be really important.
I think I like what you said about the navigating the change management, because it's about things are moving fast. And if you don't do that, well, you're going to be in trouble. Second thing is embracing change. Too many people are, and you alluded to it as well before about AI side of things. AI is here, but we also saw it when the internet came along, or we went from cassette tapes to CDs and then onto DVDs, and it's all changed and people don't like it. And the thing here would be, we need to embrace it. Doesn't mean we need to be an AI expert, but I do need to know from a leader's perspective, I do need to understand the digital side of the world, the digital side of doing business. And if I don't, then we're in trouble again. So the big thing here is embrace the change, go for it, do what you need to do, but be proactive is what I'm hearing Brian say, listeners, is be proactive in what you do, and anything in life and anything in leadership. So in other words, better for you to go ahead and take it head on and do what you need to do, but be prepared to do it to enable you to embrace change. Is that more as a summary, Brian, of what we just talked about?
And it was great, because a lot of it, Dennis, is mindset. It's just, especially as we navigate AI. I mean, if a leader says, I'm going to let my team determine how we move forward with AI, I've seen it, at least over the past year. The teams are scared and they don't want to dig in too much, because they're afraid that maybe on some level it'll start to replace them. And so what I think is important, a friend of mine who runs a business that is a very traditional business, probably of all the teams I coached, the last one I would have thought would have really embraced AI, is actually the one that has embraced it the most. Now, this is a leader who struggles with technology, but he also has a mindset as a leader that is really remarkable. And what he actually challenged his team to do was to say, rather than go about trying to figure out where we can use AI, he said, I want you to shift the way you think about this. I want you to think about the fact that AI can change the way we do absolutely everything. And then what I want you to do is look at the areas that you've just turned upside down, and you can't figure out a way that AI is going to be able to impact that. So in other words, rather than figure out how it's going to impact it, come to me and say, hey, here's the areas I just don't think we've turned this upside down. I don't think AI is going to impact this. What it did is it changed the way they viewed it. Rather than what do we put into it, it's let's just assume AI is going to take over everything, and let's embrace it that way and go backwards. And it was fascinating, because they are changing the way they do business, and no one's losing their jobs, but they're growing faster than their competitors. They're becoming way more profitable than their competitors. And it's actually, they have people who want to work with them because even though it's a traditional business, it's probably one of the most exciting businesses to be a part of right now because they're very proactive in how they're approaching this.
And I was going to ask you how the business is going. I'm glad you just shared that about how they're growing and so forth. So there you go, listeners, just embrace that change, get out there. But the growth mindset of having a mindset to look at things differently is so key and plays a big role as us in helping us as leaders be successful. Brian, thank you so much for joining me on today's session, this episode. If our listeners wanted to get a hold of you, where should they go?
Well, so legacyofsignificance.com is our website. It's a great way to reach out. Certainly, I'm on LinkedIn, which will be in the notes, but also my email is Brian, Brian, at life-bydesign.com.
Excellent. Well, once again, Brian, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and thanks for everything that you do.
Thank you very much, Dennis.
Thank you. There you go, listeners. Well, what a wonderful episode that's been in interviewing Brian and talking about leadership. So servant leadership. Are you a leader that does serve others? Are you a leader that seems to know it all, or are you getting others and getting people around you who may be able to help you? And then leading with influence and collaboration is really quite key for you to look at things. So it's time for you now to go out there and understand change, embrace change, but do it with the right mindset. Hey, thanks for joining us. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutsas. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.